This is a follow-up video to the testing I did in my video last night, right at the launch of the Title IV update for Monster Hunter Wilds that promised over 100 optimizations. In that video, a summary, I tested out GPU performance increases as well as CPU performance increases. On the GPU side of things, tested with a 5060 Ti 16GB, I noticed roughly 5% performance increase, and I tested every graphics preset from ultra to high to medium to low to lowest, both at native resolution and with DLSS upscaling. The exact numbers varied, but it was around a 5% performance increase in my testing from the Title III update to the Title IV update. The weird anomaly was that my CPU-related testing, which had focused on a Ryzen 5 5600X and used a RX 9070 XT GPU, running at low resolution with lots of upscaling to relieve the burden from the GPU to make sure we were CPU limited. And in that testing, at a variety of graphic settings, I was able to show that I'd actually had massively regressed performance, meaning the game was actually running worse on that system after the update than before the update. Now, in the comments after posting that video, some people suggested that there could potentially be some issues that could be resolved on that 9070 XT based system. And so I mentioned that I would look into that in the morning. I've now had some time to do that. This video is reporting on what I've tried and what the results were. So the first thing that people mentioned is that I should try clearing the shader cache for the game manually and then see if things improved, because apparently in the Monster Hunter Wilds community, that's a well-known potential problem, is the game not clearing shader cache properly when it installs an update, and that clearing it manually could solve some various issues. So that is something that I tested here. Now, prior to doing that and making any changes, the first test I actually ran this morning was I just ran the same system again without any changes, just to check, just like a sanity check, am I doing anything wrong? So I double checked all the settings I was running, still came out with about 52 frames per second, running at 1080p medium FSR4 performance mode. It's still showing definitely CPU limited, not GPU limited. And again, that is showing regressed performance, matching what I saw after the Title IV update last night, but significantly lower than the 64 FPS average I got at these settings on the Title III update when I tested on the same PC just a couple of days ago. So anyway, so that was just the sanity check. So then I went ahead and cleared the driver cache, and I did it the shader cache in two ways. So the first way that I did it, actually this was the second way that I did it. So the first way that I did it was by going to the actual game install folder, going, program files, x86, Steam apps, common, finding the Monster Hunter Wilds folder, and looking for anything that referenced shaders. There was a clearly labeled shader cache file, and I deleted that. I then searched the folder to see if anything else mentioned shaders, because I saw online that some people were mentioning there could be a shader cache 2 or something like that. And I then ran the benchmark again, did not notice any changes. So then I decided to also go into the Radeon driver software, where I know that under the gaming menu and then the graphics menu, there is a reset shader cache button. So I also tried pressing that button, and then I tried running the benchmark again. Now, one thing that I noticed is that it didn't trigger a very long shader compilation step after that. So I was worried that we just cleared all the shaders, but that it had not actually prompted the game to run its long shader compilation step that it does at the beginning. But I went ahead and ran the benchmark run anyway, just to see what would happen. And what I noticed is what I feared. It was pretty clear. Sorry, I guess this is not the footage that actually gets into the benchmark run. I do after that. Stutters after shader clear. Here we go. So this was a benchmark run starting immediately after clearing the shaders, now through the driver software as well. and it's very clearly stuttery, as you would expect from not having shaders precompiled. So in other words, deleting the shader cache both from the game install folder as well as through the AMD driver software did not prompt the game to re-shader compile, and so it continued to have these issues. Now my 1% lows are actually significantly worse, and you'll notice huge spikes on the frame time graph with very obvious shader compilation stutter. So by the end of this benchmark run, the overall results were lower average at 47 and 1% lows at 1 FPS, so significantly worse experience. Now, that being said, I did go ahead and do a second run on that just to see if it would be better or anything like that. But it still showed the same. It didn't go back out. Like, it got less stutters on the second run through because it's now compiled some of these shaders, but performance numbers did not go up. So I then decided to investigate the other potential problem that people had listed, which is, if you read into the driver notes, it does mention that some issues have been identified with AMD Radeon drivers versions 25.10.2 and higher. I was on the latest drivers because that is standard practice for how I test the game, and I want to be clear that my initial testing, when I was getting the 64 FPS, was on the latest driver. So I was trying to match drivers, so the only variable between testing runs was the Title IV update. So that's what I was doing. But I decided to investigate, well, what if the Title III update ran okay on the latest AMD drivers, but the Title IV update doesn't? So how about downgrading the drivers? So I went ahead and installed driver version 25.9.1 because they do mention specifically here to use AMD Radeon 25.9.1 or newer, so I chose to just go with that. So I have downloaded 25.9.1 and I installed that. And I will notice that after the driver downgrade, it did prompt a long shader pre-compilation step when I launched the game. So we did get that, which I think I recorded starting here. And this took quite a while. So it was very clearly the big, long, thorough initial install shader pre-compilation step. So that was promising, at least as far as it establishing a new shader cache. Pre-compiled fresh on the Title IV update. That being said, when I went ahead and ran the game, running through the same benchmark pass, to be clear, I'm not using the built-in, the benchmark tool for Monster Hunter Wilds because that's not getting updated. This is just mission 1, where there's a kind of follow the leader type section here where if I just take my hands off the controls, it gets a repeatable run here. So that's what I'm using for the testing. And again, while I'm not getting these shader compilation stutters or anything anymore, I'm noticing that the overall performance level here is 48 frames per second, which is actually now lower than what I was seeing on my latest drivers test run here. Now, I decided to do a second run to see if there was any improvement on the second run. And in that case, it went back up to the 52 frames per second. So it's looking like maybe this first run did have some shader compilation, still happening that wasn't caught in that initial pass. But the second one was back up to that 52 number again. So out of all of this testing, all I can say is that the system using this Ryzen 5 5600X and the 9070 XT has degraded performance with the Title IV update. Even if I go back to the older drivers, even if I delete the shader cache, I'm still seeing that degraded performance on this particular system. Now, that doesn't mean, and I was very careful to state this in my original video, that doesn't necessarily mean that every system has had degraded performance on the CPU. So what I set out to test next is, so how can I test this? Because I need to have testing that I've already ran on the Title III update so that when so I can get a direct comparison to the Title IV update. And I was thinking through, did I do anything that would have been CPU limited testing? And I checked through and I noticed that I did. I had actually done some testing on my RTX 5090, and this test run is actually something where I had run this test and then realized it wasn't the settings that I meant to test, but it is actually useful, because what this is on an RTX 5090 and a 9800X3D, this is 1080p maximum settings, so ultra with ray tracing set to high, but at 1080p resolution with DLSS set to performance mode. I actually intended this to be a 4K test, but then I had kind of abandoned testing the RTX 5090 anyway, because I realized, well, a 5060 Ti is probably more relatable to people. But I had the test footage on the Title III update done exactly at the same time as my other testing. So this was interesting because I now had something that is mostly CPU limited. Now you'll notice that it's not entirely 100% CPU limited. It is somewhat GPU limited, so this is not perfect, but it's at least another thing that we can compare with. And you can see here, like it dipping into the 80-something% range at times and the low 90s. If you watch the GPU utilization throughout this whole benchmark pass, there's certainly moments that are CPU limited, although some are still GPU limited. And by the end of the test, we do at least have a performance number to work with. We're getting about 132 frames per second where I cut off the testing. So with that in mind, I was then able to put the RTX 5090 back in to that 9800X3D based system. And I was able to then run the same test again, 1080p ultra settings with ray tracing set to high. And then running DLSS performance mode. So this is the same test. Now in this one, if we just skip to the end, you'll notice that I'm getting 134 frames per second. So I am not seeing degraded performance in the averages here. In fact, I'm getting 2 FPS more, which is less than a 2% performance increase, since we're talking 134 versus 132. And then if we look at the 1% lows, they're the same. It's 98 on the original pass and now 98 on this pass. Now, I do feel like, though, that the GPU is less utilized now than it was previously, which to me can potentially indicate we are more CPU limited than we were previously, although there are still moments where it's getting up near 100% utilization, so that's a little bit hard to talk about. So in general, in summary on all of my conclusions here for the CPU-related testing, because I'm somewhat limited in the tests that I ran on the Title III update, because I didn't anticipate there to be any problems. I anticipated run some tests on a pretty common CPU like the 5600X, run them after the update, and measure, hopefully, a performance increase. I wasn't expecting there to be a bunch of problems causing this to require further analysis. So the best I can do is say that I was not able to resolve the performance being degraded on the 5600X and 9070 XT based system. Is it potentially a problem with an AMD based system, specifically on the GPU side with the Title IV update? Possibly. And then on this 9800X3D based system with the 5090, we're not entirely CPU limited the whole run, so it's hard to directly compare, but I at least don't show degraded performance. I show the same 1% lows and slightly better averages, although such a small difference, it's hard to even mention. That being said, with all of this, I did measure improvements on the GPU overall when testing with the 5060 Ti, although it was only about 5%. So I've investigated this as much as I can for a follow-up. This is probably it for me on this. I don't even play Monster Hunter Wilds, don't really like the game. I kind of bounced off of it, but I'd seen tons of people on my channel requesting me to test this out. So I've investigated as thoroughly as I can. I would say on the CPU side of things, there's something weird happening for some systems, but it appears to maybe not be all systems. Does have an AMD GPU on that system. Perhaps that's related to what's going on, but I can't definitively test that given the pre-Title IV updates that I have. GPU performance increase, at least on the Nvidia side, because that's what I tested. I can at least confirm some improvements. That's what I got for you guys today. Hopefully you found this useful and or interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.